Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Bill. It's so nice to be home. As long as I am gone, this will always be home. And thanks to everyone who's been so warm in their welcome. I love this topic. I care deeply about this topic. I've never been a business leader. I've always been a journalist. I came this close to being a lawyer, maybe one day, went back to law school a couple of years ago. But I've been fascinated by leadership. And I've seen and experienced and witnessed through all the interviews I've done how critical strong leadership is, moral, ethical leadership, and how detrimental not having that can be. So thank you both for having this conversation. I'm fascinated by the fact that, Neil, you met Bill and really wanted to talk to him deeply about this. And Bill, I'm glad you have the book. I just got to read this. It's a fantastic book, True North. And my friend and one of our CNN contributors, David Gergen, writes at the beginning of the book, this book can help us find our way. If individual leaders can recognize when they have drifted away from True North and make successful course corrections, as Bill George argues, nations can as well. Surely authentic leadership beats what we have now. What is someone's true north?
It's who you are. It's your essence. It's basically the beliefs you have, the values you are raised with, and the principles you lead by. And if you can be clear about those things and stay on course, and then find, where do you find joy and fulfillment in your life? Is it through your work? I hope you find that kind of joy in your work. By the way, welcome back to Minnesota. We're delighted to have you, a Lake of the Isles person. But it really is, that's your essence. And I think the problem is that people, when they go out into the so-called real world, there are so many pressures and seductions that sometimes people get caught up in those and think they can get ahead quickly, violate the rules, no one will know, and they go off course. And they don't, when you see people getting in financial, in ethical and legal trouble, they didn't start out they started out here making some deviations, and they get on that slippery slope. And they go down that. So I think it's important to be grounded in who you are before you go out and try to change the world. I don't think you can have an impact on the world until you have a clear sense of yourself and who you are, and bring that self-awareness.
Neil, why were you so intrigued by Bill and wanting to have more deep conversations with him on this when you met him? What was it?
I have seen throughout the course of my career multiple instances of people I thought were highly ethical leaders who lost their way. And I didn't understand it. Like, I just could not have pictured this person doing that. And so when I saw Bill, we met socially through mutual friends, I kind of pulled him aside and said, explain this to me. And he had many examples in his own career when he's seen the same thing. Because, the fear is, I consider myself to be a highly ethical person. If this other person could lose their way, maybe any of us could lose our way. And how do you guard against that and protect yourself from that? So that's what drew me to Bill. And we dove into this conversation, and then it also dawned on me, I think a lot of other people would be interested in having this conversation too. And that's what led to us having this discussion here today with you.
And we are going to open it up for questions really throughout. So if you have one, please raise your hand and the microphones will come to you. We can do it at the end, but we can also do it throughout as well. I want to stick with you for a moment, because for those of you who have not read and you should read, the 2009 profile on Neil in the Washington Post, after he ran TARP for this country and helped save us, and then led the Fed through COVID here, now dealing with inflation, you literally went to the woods. You went to the woods. You had run for governor of California, and you went to the woods, and you had four goals: build a shed, chop wood, lose 20 pounds, and help with Hank's book, Hank being Hank Paulson. But I think in essence there you also sort of found yourself again. Is that right?
I mean, I realized what drew me to public policy was a chance to make a contribution, to hopefully make a difference, hopefully a positive difference. I always say to people, if you want to help 1,000 people, donate to a charity. That's really important. Do that. If you want to help 1 million people, you can only do that by improving the public policy of the nation, the state, the city, the world. And so that's what drew me to public policy. And I think spending time in the woods, so to speak, helped me refocus my energy on, hey, how can I make a contribution, hopefully for the better?
And you built that shed.
Built that shed, lost the weight, then gained the weight, then lost the weight again.
Wrote the book.
Helped write the book,
Did all the things. Bill, you've been having a lot of recent conversations with CEOs about this moment, and I think all of us, our ears perked up when Jamie Dimon said in the bank's third quarter earnings, quote, "This may be the most dangerous time the world has seen in decades." And if you talk about all those things together, what the war between Israel and Hamas, the war on Ukraine, Taiwan, China, inflation, the Great Resignation, the return to work, or a lot of people don't want to return to work. What are CEOs telling you about this moment, and how are you advising them?
They, and frankly, I have never seen a time of multiple intersecting crises. You just listed half a dozen of them. They affect you. You can say, oh, Russia, Ukraine, that doesn't affect us. No, it does. And anyone who has any knowledge of history know how these things can spool out of control, certainly in the Middle East. And so I think the CEOs, I was just with a group of very large company CEOs in Paris. We put together a program for them that we get together twice a year. And they are very concerned about the situation. So, but they know they can't change it. They're not going to solve these things. But then their companies have to do the right thing. They have to stay the course. And while they're dealing with these crises and trying to adapt. So today, as a leader, you have to be very adaptable. You can't just have a fixed plan and have, well, we got a 5-year strategy we're following. You actually have to be very adaptable. You have to know where you're going, keep your vision clear. But you have to adapt very quickly to changing. And I've never seen a time when they move so quickly.
Yeah.
And so you need to stay abreast of those things. The problem is, by the way, a lot of people who come into top leadership roles are trained for the internal roles, but they aren't trained for what's going on around them. Bob Chapek at Disney was not sensitive to these things. That's why he lost his job.
Do you want to talk about the Disney example anymore? Because I think that's
yeah,
interesting.
I mean,
Bob Iger leaves, Chapek comes in, and then DeSantis and Florida, and then what?
Well, it starts, though. He took $580 million in tax subsidies from the governor of Florida. So he has some culpability there. You don't do that. You know, it's a two-way street. When you sit down with the governor and he gives you certain concessions, you've got to fulfill those. And he said, but he came into office saying, I'll never comment on anything outside of Disney. And then, of course, I think you're all aware of the Parental Rights and Education Bill, which has been dubbed Don't Say Gay. But he didn't stand behind his gay employees. And needless to say, Disney has a lot of gay employees, and so they started protesting. And then he changed the position in midstream. So as a leader, I think Neil's got to know what he stands for going in. He can't, oh my gosh, I think I'll change my values or my position on this. I think you have to be clear about what you...
One thing that is clear, before Bob Iger came back to run Disney in that moment, Bob Iger actually came out and was very clear in his statement.
He did.
So, but Neil, let's take ESG as an example, okay? That's what a lot of leaders believe in. Okay, and then they put their money toward it, their strategy, their public statements, and then there's been a bit of a backlash.
Well, I think they need to make the case of, first of all, let's say you're an asset manager. It's not your money that you're investing. You are investing your client's money, and you need to be transparent with them about what their objectives are and how you're going to invest that money. So to me, if not in that specific example, it's not getting out in front of your clients. It's not your agenda. It's their money. Mm-hmm. You need to be in communication with them. And I think if you tie back to who your constituents are, who you're working for, and make sure that they are in alignment with what you're doing, that's ultimately the protection that you need, because it's their money. They're the ones who should be making the decisions. And if you're investing the way your clients are telling you to invest, then you should be able to look anybody in the eye and say, you know, I'm doing my job.
How important is admitting mistakes? And let's take the Fed as an example. How did the Fed...
We never make mistakes.
You have made mistakes. Rose-colored glasses. How did the Fed, Neil, miss such persistent high inflation? I think everyone wishes they could forget the word transient.
Transitory.
Thank you. Transitory, you're welcome. See, I already forgot it. But transitory, right? And it wasn't just you guys, it was the administration as well. What did you learn from that miss that guides how you move forward?
Yeah, well, great. You're absolutely right. We missed on transitory. By the way, not just we, I did. I was one who affirmatively said, I think this inflation is going to be short-lived. It's going to fall back down. Therefore, let's not overreact. That was obviously wrong now. So a bunch of stuff has happened. One is the pandemic was unlike anything any of us had ever experienced. Yep. The shutting of the economy, but also the reopening of the economy. You also had waves of COVID, and then you had Russia invading Ukraine all at the same time. Nonetheless, we got it wrong. So one thing I tried to do is when I do make a mistake, and I do make mistakes, I try to be very disciplined about owning it, not just in my own head, but publicly. So I published an essay a year and a half ago where I came out and said, I got it wrong. Here's what I got wrong. Here's what I looked at. Here's what I've learned from it. I can't promise you I'm not going to make mistakes in the future, and we're not. We want to minimize the mistakes, but even more importantly, we want to identify them early so that we can adjust and then not double down on this misbegotten path that we've been on. So again, we're going to do our very best. Every one of my colleagues is doing their very best to understand the dynamics driving the economy. There's a lot of uncertainty. We're going to make mistakes, but we need to own it so that we can learn from it and not repeat those mistakes.
I know you can't tell us everything, but can you take us inside the room at the Fed when you said, I got this wrong, and hopefully your fellow central bankers conceded such as well. What are those conversations like, and how do they help you now? Because what you decide impacts all of us.
Well, I mean, I think it's hopefully what we're left with is overwhelming humility, which is we didn't understand the dynamics of COVID. We never lived through it before. There was so much uncertainty around the reopening of the economy. Now there continues to be great uncertainty about how financial markets are responding. So right now, there's a lot of focus on the Treasury yield curve and what's driving some of the moves in the yield curve. If anybody tells you definitively that they know exactly what's driving that, be very suspect, because none of us knows for sure. And so, we'll all have our various theories, but the big takeaway is none of us knows for sure. So let's not bet on any one explanation, because we might get that wrong.
Bill.
I think this is a great example. We all make mistakes. And I think as a leader, the first thing we have to do is own our mistakes. I wrote a book a few years ago after the banking crisis of 2008 and 9. And the first lesson about leading in crisis is face reality, starting with yourself. And reality changes. No one is clairvoyant. You don't know exactly what's going to happen with COVID. You don't know exactly what's going to happen with all these events. You didn't predict Russia was going to invade Ukraine, I'll bet. But then when you see it changing, you have to be adaptable. That's why I say, as a leader, but you have to say, we got it wrong. I think it's very courageous you do it. I know a lot of leaders that won't admit their mistakes. And what happens then is they start covering up their mistakes. Those are the ones sometimes go to jail because they maybe if they admitted the first mistake, they could have gotten out of it.
It's so important. You teach this in your courses, right? And you have a pretty poignant example of your time at Medtronic on admitting mistakes.
Well, I came to Medtronic. I was still chief operating officer, and we had to reorganize the globe. And I wanted to have a president of Europe, promoted a very competent person, come from a subsidiary to president of Europe, very powerful position in the company, and he had all the qualifications you could hope for. 6 months after I appointed him, our general counsel comes to the door and said, Bill, can I call up our chief auditor? That's not the norm. And they showed me he'd been running a bribery fund on behalf of Italian doctors for 24 years, but the 4 years were on Medtronic's watch. So firing him was the easy thing for me. Called him over from Belgium, said, you have to leave. He accused me of imposing European ethics, or American ethics on Europeans, but anyway, nonetheless. I said, no, John, these are Medtronic ethics. Beat our standards. You violated our standards, not some kind of American. But then going to the board of directors, the executive committee, and I was the new kid on the block, and then going out publicly. We went right away the same day to the SEC and said, wait, can we come down and see you and talk about this? Because here's what we found. And fortunately, it could have very easily been a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act violation. In the end, they did not hold us. They did not pursue it because they said you self-reported right away as soon as we found it. And I just think you have to face that. But if we had tried to say, well, let's not talk about this, we don't want anyone to know, it could have gotten much worse.
You, in March of 2002, Neil, reminded people of a letter that Abraham Lincoln wrote to General Grant. This is from July 13th, 1863. My dear General, I write this now as a grateful acknowledgement for the almost inestimable service you have done to this country. I wish to say a word further. When you turned northward, east of Big Black, I feared it was a mistake. I now wish to make the personal acknowledgement that you were right and I was wrong. Yours very truly, Abraham Lincoln.
Wow.
Why do you bring that up?
Well, those of you who know me know I'm a little bit of a history junkie. And the thing about Lincoln that just amazes me is Ulysses S. Grant knew that Lincoln wanted him to do something else. They both knew it. But Grant went out of his way to say, I want to acknowledge for the record that you were right and I was wrong. And so that's like my great reminder. I'm not Abraham Lincoln. You're not Abraham Lincoln. But if Abraham Lincoln could go out on the record and say, you were right and I was wrong, then you know what? So can we. And so that's just a reminder that I always say to myself, if he could do this in this situation, why can't I have the courage to do that? And so I love that letter. It's a famous letter, but I stumbled upon it, and it was like, wow, how cool is that?
I love it too. I think it's interesting how much Abraham Lincoln has been referred to in the last, especially in the Republican Party, in the last, especially couple of years. We should pay attention. Bill, you wrote this great piece 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, Why Leaders Lose Their Way. And in it, you say that every leader needs to ask themselves two fundamental questions. Why do I want to leave, and what's the purpose of my leadership?
Right.
Why are those two questions so important in helping leaders not lose their way?
Well, if you're leading for money, fame, and power, you're going the wrong way, and you can get yourself in very deep trouble. Okay, you will do well financially if your organization does well. Fame is very fleeting. You can be, Jack Welch was the greatest leader of my time, and now, his people are questioning him. And, if it's all about power, our job in leadership is not to have power over other people. It's to empower people who work with us, because they can do so much more when they feel empowered. And I think if you need clarity of purpose, why are you doing this? So, Poppy, I actually left a great company, Honeywell, to join Medtronic because the purpose was making money. And I believe we've been in a lot of business, know how to make money, but that can't be your sole purpose. And so we went to Medtronic, and our purpose was restoring people to full life and health. And we actually measured it by how many seconds does it take till another person's health is restored by a Medtronic product. So I think you need to have clarity about that before you take on the leadership role, because if you don't find that, then you're liable to go the wrong way. And I've seen way too many people get caught up in themselves and think they're so great, and I'm responsible for all this success when they've got a huge organization underneath them.
Let's talk about a couple of examples. One, I would go back to your time on the board of Goldman with Rajat Gupta, former head of McKinsey, was found convicted of securities fraud in 2012. I'd note in his book, he still maintains his innocence. What did you learn from that experience? And then let's talk about the conviction of Sam Bankman-Fried just late yesterday.
I would love to. Rajat Gupta was a great guy. I looked up to him as a leader. We were on two boards together. I helped recruit him to the Goldman Sachs board. He helped me get on the World Economic Forum board. And he was a leader I looked up to. And I'm sitting next to him in the Goldman boards. Now, I had no idea that 16 seconds after this very critical meeting where we had the most inside information that Warren Buffett was going to invest $10 billion in Goldman Sachs, and the stock had been on a rapid decline. This September, when everything was going, about 2 weeks after Lehman failed, and, we're going to be next. And so, the fact of that was highly inside information. There's no one that wouldn't argue that was inside. So he called someone a well-known inside trader that Goldman wouldn't do business with, and Rajaratnam, who invested a lot of money, tens of millions of dollars, just before the market closed. But it was very sad to see this happen. He was a good person, but he got caught up in the money. And it's on the record he was worth $120 million when he graduated. He retired from McKinsey in his early 60s. As I said, most of us can kind of scrape through to the end with $120 million in our pockets. But he wanted to be a billionaire, and he got caught up in that, and that unique. He wanted to be in that unique circle of billionaires. So I find it sad. Sam Bankman-Fried's in a different class. He actually never did anything to achieve success. He conned a lot of people. And, I just like to read a statement from the U.S. Attorney. Sam Bankman-Fried perpetrated one of the biggest financial frauds in American history, okay? Designed to make him king of crypto. But here's the thing. Players like Sam Bankman-Fried may be new, but this kind of fraud, this kind of corruption, is as old as time, and we have no patience for it. So my question for all of us is, how do we get caught up in this thing? He's playing with other people's money. I don't think any of it was his own money. And his firm got up to, I think, $32 billion, or his personal wealth got up to $32 billion. Of course, it's all gone now. But, why do people invest in him? They're pretty sophisticated investors that invested behind him. Is it FOMO? What's causing us to do that? But we got to realize these people are all outside the system. The Fed is one of the strongest and toughest regulators. I dealt with them all the time on the Goldman board. They are really good, and they're really tough, and they can frustrate the heck out of you. But that's a good thing, they did a lot of good things to get us out of this mess. And today, I think you can look at it, the regulated banks are actually very healthy. And if we do go into recession, I feel pretty confident they're going to come through it very strong. But we're investing in people outside the system. And frankly, Neil could comment on this if he wants to. I can't find any benefit for crypto. You always have to ask, if we got a new product, what's the benefits of people who are going to use it? And the only benefit I can find is money laundering, because you can't trace the transactions.
Well,
you can trace
benefit.
To whom?
The criminals.
Do you agree with that assessment? There are some big names on Wall Street who agree with Bill. There's a lot who don't.
For 6-7 years now, I've been asking if anybody to give me one example of a legitimate financial use that is solved by crypto. I've yet to hear anybody. One person told me, this is a true story, one person told me, he did a transaction he couldn't do any other way, and he was trying to buy arms from an arms dealer in Germany to send to Ukraine because his bank wouldn't wire the money to the arms dealer.
And because they were going to Ukraine, he was saying it's justified.
It's justified, but it's not legal for an American to buy arms across border to send it, even to an ally.
That is correct.
I don't want to say it's not possible that any utility, any actual usefulness to society could come from crypto. I don't want to rule out that possibility, but I also cannot rule out that these magic beans might grow a beanstalk.
But can I also ask you, given the conviction of Sam Bankman-Fried, I think it begs the question of Washington and regulators, and what does this mean now? Because frankly, something is the Wild West when it's allowed to be the Wild West, when regulators are behind other actors in the space. So what does this mean for regulation, for markets, for other Sam Bankman-Frieds, for other crypto firms?
I think the SEC has a lot of power in protecting investors from fraudsters. Whether you're selling a bridge in Florida or you're selling magic beans, I think a lot of this should be under the auspices of the SEC to say, hey, we're here for investor protection.
But are they a security or not? That's the question, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are securities. But that's a good question. I know the SEC is trying to be aggressive, and some of this stuff is being litigated. Yeah, but as you said, this type of fraud is, Sam Bankman-Fried's not the only one. Theranos, another great example. WeWork, not to pick on you on behalf of all of your colleagues.
On the media? We're used to it.
But the media has a role here. They hoist these folks up
fair.
like they're heroes. They put them on the cover of Fortune, the next, great genius, and there's nothing there.
That's totally fair. I think it begs the Fourth Estate to do our own introspection. Not just on that. Look at George Santos. There was, 2 small papers in Long Island that had been waving the flag on this before the election, right? And it's incumbent on us in the media, especially national media, to absolutely. It's on all of us.
Everybody, yeah.
For sure. I want to ask about your experiences when leaders go astray. Former colleague at PIMCO, also formerly not that long ago within the Fed.
Yeah, well, the Fed president examples where a couple of Fed colleagues were trading stocks. It was just shocking because nobody had to tell me not to trade stocks. You don't need to. If somebody had come to me and said, "Hey, you should be careful that some colleagues might be trading stocks," I would have said, "That's absurd." Of course we're not trading stocks. And so, I give the media credit. The media asked questions. Let me see your financial disclosures. The Wall Street Journal broke the story, and it led to big changes. And so that's another example of I just can't explain it. I cannot explain how somebody in the position that I'm in would possibly think that was okay to be trading stocks. And that's why I said, Bill, help me understand this.
So your standards, if you're in a leadership role, your standards cannot be equivalent to the firm's ethical standards. They have to be above reproach. Everyone's watching. Every time Neil does, people are watching everything he does. in a role like he's in. If you're a CEO, everyone's watching. So, you know, you need to set a higher standard for yourself. And we have a lot of, we've had like 400 major CEOs come through our programs at Harvard in small groups of 12 each. That's one thing we talk about. Are your standards above reproach? Is there anything, you know, and how are you going to ensure they are? Because you're going to be watched everything, and you set the standard for your organization, like it or not. And some of them don't like it, by the way, but you are the image of the organization. And it's so important that you set that standard and you maintain it. And it sounds like I'm being purer but no, that's your job. That's not being pure. That is your job.
And that goes back to the question, why do you want to lead? Really deeply
it does, yeah.
Look in the mirror and ask yourself that question.
Yeah, and if it's about you, then you're probably doing the wrong thing. If it's about building a great organization that can affect human lives, that's wonderful. And so, yeah, I think that's what, you have to be clear about that. And by the way, there are a lot of financial people, a lot of bankers in this room. Let me make a strong comment. Next to healthcare, banking's probably the most noble profession, because we can't do anything without fuel in our tanks. It gives us the fuel in our tanks. It enables everything else. It enables us to found companies, enables to expand businesses, enables us to protect our funds and then hopefully grow them so that we have a nest egg when we retire. And so people have beat up on finance. Neil, if you want my blunt opinion, I wish the whole system, I don't like this shadow banking system. You know, some of you are in it, fine, but I think everyone should have the regulations. I don't think that Sam Bankman-Fried would have made it with a regulated bank. I think he would have been exposed.
I want to dig into that more, but are there any questions at this point? If anyone has questions, raise your hand. Okay, if you do.
Sri has one.
Yes, right there, and we're going to bring...
Microphone's coming to you, Sri.
We're going to run... Microphone's coming. If you could just stand up, if you don't mind, just so everyone can see you, tell us your name and who you're representing here.
It's right, the mic's right there, Sri.
This is Sri Zahir.
I'm Sri Zahir. I was formerly Dean of the Carlson School of Management, and I'm still a faculty member there, and I'm also a life trustee of Hamilton College. So I disagree with you, Bill. Apart from healthcare and banking, I think education is right up there. But setting that aside, higher education has always been a place where people come together, discuss things openly, disagree with each other, but respectfully, and at the end of the day, support each other. Those are the values that we want to communicate. Right now, emotions are so raw that higher education institutions across the country are having enormous trouble, the leaders, in trying to figure out how to reinforce these values again. There is so much unrest on campuses around the Middle East particularly, but also around other issues. And so what advice would you give leaders in terms of how to bring, some sense of calm and respect, and this idea, this Rousseau-like idea that you can disagree vehemently, but you have to, at the end of the day, support each other. That's what we're here for. How do you reinforce that?
I feel strongly that as a leader of a great educational institution, which I work at one, you've got to get out in front of these issues and make a statement. Because there are many people on your campus with different points of view. Okay, let me get right into the controversial issue.
Well, Harvard is the poster child for this right now.
Yes. Hamas, okay. And I came out on Saturday night with a statement on LinkedIn and Twitter, on X, I don't know about that one, but where I just said, you have to condemn everything Hamas did. And you have to have empathy for the Israeli people. But at the same time, you're going to have empathy for the Palestinian people. They live in terrible conditions. And so I'm not going to get into the battle of all the details, but I think you have to say we stand, on behalf. And we're opposed on our campus to any form of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia.
Wow.
And by the way, if you come to my classroom and you make an anti-Semitic statement or you say all Muslims are terrorists, you're gone. You're out of there. You can't stay, whether you're a CEO or you're an MBA.
Bill, why have a number of, and I'm not grouping them together, why have a number of college and university presidents fumbled on this recently?
Free speech. And I believe in free speech. But aren't there limits to free speech?
Of course, the Supreme
Don't we
Court
have
has...
standards relative to free speech? You can't say things,
The Supreme Court has made clear there are limits to free speech.
I just feel like we have to say free speech doesn't mean you can say anything that's hurtful to anyone. And particularly, when you make statements to an individual about whole groups of people. So I think, I feel pretty strongly about this, sorry, but I think you really have to stand up and be counted and get ahead of it And yeah, there are going to be students on your campus, just like there are at Harvard, pro-Palestinian groups, pro-Israeli groups, or Israeli donors pulling out. And I think she made a beautiful statement, Claudine Gay, about 5 days later. I wish she'd gotten out on Sunday morning. And some people would say that's risky. Yeah, it is risky. But you know what we stand for. By the way, you have to know a priori what you stand for. Neil said about how he personally feels about one particular issue that some people would consider in the gray area, trading stocks as a Fed president. But he's clear about that. That's why you need the clarity about your values in advance. Because under pressure, you may start to vacillate. What do I do? What do I do? No, if you're clear about it, then you say, this is what our institution stands for, period.
You know, my husband quotes Alice in Wonderland a lot to me. And he said, well, here's the quote. If you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter what path you take to get there.
Any road will get you there. That's right.
There you go. Any other questions as we continue? Yes, right here in the back. Good question, Sri. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. The media, are we putting too much pressure and expectations on the media to find issues as leaders, both public and private sector? The media is already experiencing just terrible pressure right now economically, and the model may be not viable going forward.
Can we get your name, too, and who you represent?
Eric
and thank you for standing up for the media. Go ahead.
Eric Michelet, Strategic Business Coach, Consulting. Thank you.
Okay. It's an interesting question, Neil. I don't know if you want to address it, but our business circumstances as media writ large, should that really have an impact on our job?
Well, think of it this way. Think of the two examples we spoke about a few moments ago. Is it realistic to expect the media to do all the vetting work of all congressional candidates? There are a lot of 400 plus members of Congress every 2 years. That's a big burden to expect the media. But I will say, contrast that with the media's role in promoting Elizabeth Holmes, Sam Bankman-Fried. You know, it's one thing to say you're not responsible for doing all the vetting. It's another thing to put them on the cover of your magazines and say these are heroes of the future. And so I think one of those is a reasonable expectation, at least, not to do that.
So I agree with you, Neil, but I also feel strongly, thank God for the media bringing a lot of these things out that might be hidden otherwise, that we would never know about if the media were not doing some form of investigative journalism and knowing some of the terrible things going on. So yeah, maybe they're going to get some wrong. But what I worry about with the media day, and Poppy, this will throw in this one back to you. There's established media, but any one of us in this room can become an author right today. So we walk out of here and just publish on X, and you can get away with saying anything you want. And they've now removed all the constraints to what you say. And it could be the exact opposite of what Neil just said. And, you know, that's the problem is, you know, it's not vetted. Where's the editor checking what you get checked, right?
Of course. I mean, I'll just give you an example, and this is why I will, you know, look, I still believe, and maybe call me, you know, Pollyannish, but I still believe some of our best days are ahead of us. I'm invigorated and excited for our new leadership at CNN. Just a couple weeks ago, Mark Thompson took over. You'll know him for running the BBC and turning around the New York Times. You know, and I do believe there is that future ahead because there is not only a desire but a need for accuracy and truth and facts for our society to operate and to function. So here's one example. The other night, I was going to bed and I was on Twitter and I saw something tweeted out that was video on a college campus of what looked like violence in a student protest. So I sent it to our overnight editor and I said, hey, can we vet this so when I wake up at 3 in the morning, we can know if we can use it on the show? I wake up to a long note from him and Standards and Practices and the Row that overnight had spent the time to say, we believe this is edited, we advise you can't use it, let's not use it, da-da-da-da-da. I didn't use it on the show. That's what we go through before you see something on CNN this morning. That doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. I make mistakes, we make mistakes. But that is what we can do as media and what we have to do, and that's what you're not getting with everyone being a journalist. At the same time, I find a huge advantage to society for sometimes I see things on X, Twitter, what have you, that call my attention that I had missed before, that I think we need to be covering. I hear voices that I don't hear in Brooklyn, New York, where I live, or when I'm home here. So there's an advantage, but it has to be checked, is what I would say to that.
The checking is critical. I mean, think about the President of the United States is flying to Israel, okay, in the midst of the crisis, and there's a bomb that goes off on a supposedly Gaza hospital. I guess it actually hit the parking lot. And it's attributed to the Israelis. It turned out it was not the Israelis.
By some.
But meanwhile...
It was wrongly attributed by some.
Wrongly attributed. But meanwhile, right, the Egyptian president has called off the summit with the president of the United States. This is an important summit.
In Jordan, it didn't happen.
And with the head of the PLO. And these were in Jordan, and Jordan called it off too. And so it shows how these misleading sources, without being checked.
We have to. I mean, we have to be right, not first. You just have
and that's
to
so
be
hard. I'm working with one of the people I've been working closely with is Almar Latour, who's publisher of the Wall Street Journal and CEO of Dow Jones. And he came in saying, we are going to only print the truth. That is what we're going to do. Now, our editorial pages are the opinion of the owner of the newspaper, so that's something else, and you can debate about that. Yeah. But he has at least tried to hold to that standard.
And there's value to, I think, I read the editorials every morning. I think there's a value to opinion, too.
But they are opinions.
That's right.
It's got a name on the opinion.
That's right.
We shouldn't publish news, which is really an opinion.
As I ask other questions, I want to ask you about Washington, because in that same profile from 2009, they were asking you, will you go back to D.C.? And you said, at that point, there's nowhere else you can have such a large impact, for better or worse. Do you still think that's true today?
Well, I think it's true, just policy in general. That's what drew me to jump at the chance to join the Fed, to try to hopefully make a positive influence on important public policy issues, whether that's in Washington or in St. Paul, here in Minnesota, or City Council. I think you can have positive change. You can advance big ideas and help things get better.
Washington's not broken.
Washington has challenges, which we are all very, very well aware of. But I do think in times of crisis, our democracy can function very, very well. I think the bigger challenge for our democracy is functioning when we're not in crisis.
That's a great point.
Wow.
That's a great point.
So can I just comment on the business community, which takes its hits with some of these scoundrels? But let me say, I think a lot of leaders in the business community are most of all the ones I know are extraordinarily ethical today and really trying hard to do the right thing and are willing to speak out on issues. I'll give you an example. Somebody I've worked closely with, Chip Bergh, who is CEO of Levi Strauss for the last 11 years. He was concerned a few years ago that his customers, young girls who wear jeans, were scared. And so he came out very strongly on behalf of gun safety. Not gun control, but gun safety.
It's actually, his daughter has asked him a lot of hard questions on climate change and guns that help
and I know his
him.
daughter.
Yeah.
But then he came out just before the Supreme Court decision on Roe versus Wade, and he said abortion is a business issue. Now, he hadn't gotten into the morality, and some of you are going to feel on opposite sides of that, but at least he took a stand on behalf of Levi Strauss, that we're concerned about women and our employees. Over 60% of the people we employ are women. We have to be concerned for them. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying some people do have courage to get out and make statements, which I admire. And I realize these are controversial, and some of you will take umbrage at this, but that's okay.
I have this debate at home over the dinner table with my husband a lot on, is that the role of businesses? It works? I mean, Chip believes these things. I've covered him deeply as a leader. And his business continues to thrive. I think you saw the same thing with Howard Schultz at Starbucks. There are others that would take the position that, it has the chance to really hurt our business. Should we still do it, or is that antithetical to our job to lead this company and our fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders?
I would say you better know who your employees are and your customers are. In Disney, they didn't back their employees. I think you better know that. I happen to know the CEO of AB InBev that owns Bud Light, and that was something 5 levels down, and I think they regret that. They kind of led with their chin, and you can make your own position about this, but I know they regret that ever happened. Now, take a really complex one right here in our town. We can go right to it.
Sure.
Our largest corporation, a company called Target, some of you may have shopped there, had a really difficult situation. Target has been the most, let's be blunt, the most gay-friendly company in town, very public about it, very supportive of their LGBTQ plus community, and nationally they've become known that way. And then they had the Pride Collection after the 11th year of the Pride Collection, and they're having employees physically get beaten up. So
did you talk to Brian
was
Cornell
on TV.
Yeah,
he was on TV. It's a very difficult, nuanced situation. He was on TV yesterday saying, I felt I had to protect my employees. Here you have 2 competing interests, both of which are value. Mm-hmm. And he said, I had to protect my employees, so he pulled back some. And
hard decisions leaders
That's what I'm saying.
make.
You get hit with these.
Yes, right here. And just tell us your name and where you're from.
My name is Kofi Bruce. I work at General Mills. And thank you for your comments, Neil, Bill, Poppy. I would just want to pick up on that last discussion there, because I think it's really interesting, and it's kind of the challenge of the moment for many of us in leadership roles in business, which is there's the weight of expectations of the people and the organizations you serve to speak out on so many issues these days as leaders. And kind of what's the framework that each of you think about on when you wade in and maybe when you don't? Because there's risk either way. Not wading in has consequences as much as sometimes wading in proactively does. So how do you think about that? What are the other factors you weigh? And Bill, you started to lay out a few of them, but I would love to hear each of you kind of reflect on that.
I'm happy coming. You want to go first?
Very briefly, for me at the Minneapolis Fed, I think the standard is weigh in, make it count when you weigh in. If you want to weigh in every day on something, that's all you're going to do. You'll be weighing in every day because there's stuff happening around the world that somebody in your organization cares about. So we weighed in at the Minneapolis Fed very strongly, and I gave very direct comments when George Floyd was murdered a couple of days later. And I had members of the media taken aback and said, we've never seen a Federal Reserve president that stark in my comments and calling out the racism that I saw. And I said, listen, we live here. This is our town. Our employees live here. This is affecting so many of our friends, our neighbors, our staff, our colleagues. I have to weigh in. That was a clear case of, yes, it's the right thing to weigh in and do it strongly with what we believe in. And then it's just, I don't have a clean answer. It's just you got to pick your spots and you weigh in when it really counts. And that one was an obvious one where it really, really counted.
I would say thank you. I appreciate that example. It's a great example. I would say, again, we talk about purpose, Poppy. It starts with your company's purpose and its values. And if this reads on your purpose, if it's a healthcare issue, Medtronic's got to have a position on it. But it doesn't have to have a position on everything. And so, like I have great empathy for the Uyghurs in China. I've visited with them. But that's not my issue. And so as a leader, I'm not going to be commenting on that. So I think you have to decide, does this read on my purpose? So the examples I've given you read directly on company's purpose and, frankly, their values. Part of the values is to provide a great environment for our employees. That's why I use that nuanced example to show some of these conflicts.
But I would just push to your great question. Just eating General Mills cereal last night, right? We talk with Howard Schultz at Starbucks, they're a coffee company. But he was one of the first ones to come out and talk about social issues, to take on race. Some of the things backfired on their business.
Yep.
When it's not about the core product of your company, how do you decide when to speak on it? And I think Neil makes a great point that if you say something on everything, people don't listen as much.
Right.
It's a difficult question that leaders have to ask themselves.
Yeah.
Do you have any
think
advice?
You can't just take on everything. I really agree with you. I think, again, it's got to be what's really important to you. And I use the example also of George Floyd's murder. If you're a CEO in Minneapolis, you had to have a position. Not only that, you actually had to go take a much harder look at what's happening with your black employees and other BIPOC employees. Maybe their lives are not the same as everyone else. Maybe you need to understand. You haven't fully understood that in depth.
I remember Ed Bastian of Delta.
Yeah.
I remember it was Northwest Airlines from when I was a kid here, coming on with me, talking about the changes that Delta was making after reflecting on that, for example. Other questions?
By the way, he had one of the great statements, Poppy. Delta's values are not for sale.
Yep. I think we have to go pretty soon. Is that right? We have one more question before we get to that question, because I'm a journalist and the media has to ask questions on the news, Neil. A couple of quick questions for you just on the economy. We just saw the jobs report, 150,000 jobs added. Still, though, there's a question of, is it enough slowing for the Fed to be able to stop on raising rates? Your comments on that this morning.
It's one job report. The last 3 months, we're averaging around 250,000 a month. This suggests that the labor market is slowing, which we're looking for. That's helpful, gives us more comfort that the economy is moving back into balance, but I don't want to overreact to one job report.
But Jerome Powell said yesterday officials may not need to raise rates more, but it seemed like the market shrugged that off in essence, and we saw a slide in Treasury yields. And if this persists, could it force the Fed to move more nimbly and consider another rate hike?
You know, we just have to keep watching the data. Keep watching the labor market data like today. Keep watching the wage data. Keep watching the actual inflation data. Our forecasting, in case you haven't noticed, our forecasting hasn't been that great in the last few years. And so we just need to keep watching the actual data to see, are we actually making enough progress to get inflation down to our 2% target? So it's too soon to call.
One more news question for you, and then let's get the mic to whoever is going to ask the last question. Stan Druckenmiller, hedge fund giant, about Janet Yellen just a couple of days ago. Quote, Janet Yellen, I guess because of myopia or whatever, was issuing 2-year treasuries at 15 basis points when she should have issued 10 years at 70 basis points or 30 years at 180 basis points. I literally think if you go back to Alexander Hamilton, this represents the biggest blunder in the history of the Treasury. I have no idea why she has not been called out on it. She has no right to be in that job. Janet Yellen responded last night to my colleague, Aaron Burnett, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond.
You know, it's Treasury's job to decide how they fund themselves, but I'm going to make an observation. In my experience, every time there's a new administration or a new Treasury secretary, they look at the Treasury yields and say, oh my gosh, it's so attractive, we want to extend the debt. And then they start to do that, and then they talk to bond market experts, and they realize there's limit to depth at these various yields. And it's to simply say, well, they could have taken all these 2-year issuance and issued it at 10 years, the price would have moved, and the yields would have moved. And so it's just, it's a very simplistic analysis that Mr. Druckenmiller gave, and so I don't share his perspective.
Okay. Last question right here. Hi.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Naivetya Patle. I'm a student at Carlson School and Humphrey School. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. We did touch base on the ESG space and the leadership area in ESG realm. However, I do want to know, what's your take on the governance side of the ESG realm, and what's the government strategies that you have equipped, with your experiences and wants to pass out to the students, who wants to break into ESG, especially in the governance space. Thank you.
ESG in the government space.
Governance. I mean, I think this whole conversation has been about leadership, which is really about governance. And governance is the application of some of these leadership principles. And so, I could turn to Bill on strategies on how boards of directors are organized to, maximize the benefit for the shareholders and for the employees and whatnot. But clearly, governance is really important, and it comes back to True North, comes back to values, comes back to what is the mission of your organization. Bill?
Absolutely. I mean, again, we need strong governance, we need smart boards of directors, and we need people in strong positions of leadership, and there needs to be clarity about that. But remember, a board member has the future of the organization in their hands, and if it goes under, like Silicon Valley Bank did, shame on the board members. They have a responsibility to preserve, protect, and make important decisions about the future of that institution. It's not just about the leadership, and it's not just about earnings per share. They have that. And so I think if every board member in a nonprofit felt the same way, for-profits, and people that serve on academic boards as well, it's very important.
Thank you all. What a delightful and important conversation. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Bill.
Great job.
And thank you to the Economic Club of Minnesota.
Thank you, Poppy. Thank you.